What's up, guys? It's time for another XEB Plus Neutrino launcher update. This is a piece of PlayStation 2 homebrew software I've been developing that acts as a front end for Neutrino. If you don't already know what that is, I've got a whole playlist you can go watch to get caught up on the backstory. I don't want to waste any time, so let's get right into the big new feature of this update: virtual memory cards. I am very excited to finally be able to talk about this in an update video. VMC support is something I've been wanting to add to Neutrino Launcher ever since I started this project all the way back in July. I have spent far more time and effort getting this one feature implemented and working to my satisfaction than I have on any other part of the plugin. This time, the feature overview and updated setup guide will be towards the end of the video, because I want to spend the next little bit just talking about why VMCs took so dang long to implement, and share with you all the stuff I learned along the way. Now, before I start getting into the weeds, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. In the context of the PlayStation 2, a virtual memory card, or VMC, is a digital file that certain software is able to use in place of a physical PS2 memory card. In this case, I'm using them with Neutrino, which is a game backup loader that can tell games to save data to a VMC instead of a real memory card. This feature saves the cost and hassle of using physical memory cards, and provides functionally unlimited memory card space in most situations. There are some notable limitations, both with VMCs in general and their implementation in Neutrino, which has made adding them to the Neutrino Launcher plugin a bit tricky. The first is that VMC image files must be created before they can be used, and once created cannot be resized. The PS2 supports a maximum memory card size of 128 megabytes, but some games have trouble saving to larger memory cards. It's generally best to not exceed the 8 megabyte size used by Sony, and that means juggling multiple VMC images if I want to have a scalable implementation. Additionally, Neutrino can only mount VMC images that are stored on the same drive as the game they're being used with. That may not sound too bad until you remember that XEB Plus cannot directly access any file system except for the USB drive it's installed on. If your games are stored on a hard drive, network share, or SD card, the plugin can't create or manage VMCs directly. This is the same problem I faced when getting XEB Plus to load games from these devices in the first place, so I've already developed a solution in the form of the Neutrino List Builder. Adding VMC integration to this utility wasn't too difficult, and as of this update, there's an option to create a dedicated 8 megabyte VMC image for each game it adds to the list. The biggest downside to this solution is that if you don't create VMCs ahead of time, you won't have the option to use them later unless you go back and rebuild the list. Now, I actually worked out most of this implementation a couple months ago. The reason it's taken until now to be released is because of what I talked about towards the end of my last update video. The strategy of creating one VMC image per game, or more accurately one VMC image per game disk, works great for most of the PS2 library. There are exceptions, however. It doesn't work for multi-disc games, because on the PS2, each disc always has its own title ID. There's also a large number of games containing features that won't work unless they share a memory card with one or more other games. Usually this is some sort of exclusive item or in-game bonus that you get for having saved data from a specific game on your memory card. Every other VMC implementation I'm aware of either ignores these edge cases, or leaves it up to the user to manage VMC files and make sure they're assigned appropriately. That wasn't good enough for me. I wanted a system that would automatically assign multiple games to a single VMC as needed to ensure full compatibility with multi-disc titles and cross-game save features. Someone who has no idea that War of the Monsters and Twisted Metal Black were made by the same developer should be able to play both games with VMCs enabled and be pleasantly surprised when they unlock Sweet Tooth as a kaiju. I'm happy to say that I've largely achieved that goal, but it was no small undertaking. Historically, cross-save interactions on the PS2 have been poorly documented. So about a month ago, I created a wiki page to catalog them all in one place, and I put out a call to you guys to help fill it out. A few people made contributions and documented some cross-save features that I definitely would have missed, most notably the Japanese exclusive unlock bonuses present in every DDR game. Ultimately, though, I did not receive as much help as I would have liked, and I ended up filling out the majority of this page myself. This was extremely time-consuming and involved a lot of research, mostly in the form of combing through archived manuals and 20-year-old GameFAQs guides. When I first started this project, I was expecting to come up with somewhere around 30 groups of games that should have a common memory card, not counting multi-disc titles. The actual number is currently 67, and I'm sure there's more that haven't been cataloged yet. As of right now, I would estimate that we've documented around 80 to 90% of cross-save interactions on the PS2, at least for games that received an English language release. For titles that were never released outside Japan or other non-English speaking countries, I imagine our coverage is more like 10 to 20%. Cross-save features are most common amongst games in the same series, and there are a ton of Japanese exclusive series on the PS2 that have little to no detailed information about them on the English internet. There are a couple Japan-only cross-save groups that I was able to piece together, but those I'm not 100% sure on due to spotty translation and a general lack of information compared to games released in the West. If anyone watching this happens to speak Japanese, I encourage you to head over to the Neutrino Launcher wiki and document all the Japan-only cross-save features you can find. When you compile all the PS2's cross-save features into a single list like this, you start to notice some interesting trends and other oddities, and that's what I want to share here. I already mentioned how most interactions are between games in the same series, but the likelihood that any given series will have these features seems to largely depend on both the publisher and developer. It should come as no surprise that a lot of Sony-published titles feature cross-save bonuses, but their distribution is kind of lopsided. For example, the Jak games all share one memory card group, but that's only because the spin-off Kart Racer has extra characters that unlock if you've played prior games in the series. There are no interactions within the main trilogy. Conversely, the Ratchet & Clank series has cross-save features across its first 3 entries, but the pseudo-spin-off Deadlocked lacks them, and is instead grouped in with the Jak games because of another unlockable bonus in Jak X. Meanwhile, the Ratchet games that were ported over from the PSP interact with each other, but not any of the Insomniac-developed titles, and Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier is left out completely. Sony's other PS2 mascot platformer, Sly Cooper, lacks any form of cross-save interaction between its titles. Same with Ape Escape and God of War, though cross-save features are present in ATV Off-Road Fury, Gran Turismo, and the Eco Shadow of the Colossus duology. Moving on from Sony, Koei is another company that loves to use cross-save. Nearly all of their Warriors and Romance of the Three Kingdom games have it implemented in some capacity. Same with Konami, who has cross-save bonuses present in most of their big-name franchises that received multiple PS2 entries. There's also CyberConnect 2, the developer behind the Dot Hack and Naruto games. They have cross-save interactions across every single one of their PlayStation 2 releases. Outside of those specific companies, cross-save features are a lot less common and a bit more varied in their design. There's a number of groups on this list that essentially just contain a single title. These are for enhanced editions and re-releases that don't share a save file, but let you import data from earlier versions of the same game. Things like Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition and Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix fall into this category. The more common franchise loyalty bonuses tend to mostly show up in RPGs and series that receive annual installments, though some of these are a bit odd in their implementation. Need for Speed is a good example. Most of the black box Need for Speed games start you off with a $10,000 bonus if you have a save file from the prior year's release. For some reason, this trend only started with Most Wanted, which looks for a Need for Speed Underground 2 save. Underground 2 does not detect Underground 1 saves, though, meaning that the one game in this lineage that's a direct sequel won't acknowledge if you've played the prior entry. Meanwhile, Need for Speed Carbon can only detect save files from the original version of Most Wanted. If you played the Black Edition, which I imagine most people will these days, you don't get the starting bonus in Carbon. THQ games are another interesting case. Their output on the PS2 consists primarily of licensed kids games made to tie in with various cartoons and toy brands. These games are ideal for the kind of brand loyalty incentives cross-save features are typically used for, especially with so many of them being on an annual release schedule. So would you believe that out of the dozens of PlayStation 2 titles THQ published, I was only able to find 6 that had any sort of cross-save interaction, and they're all Nickelodeon games? 2 of them are based on Avatar The Last Airbender, and it's just your standard have a save file from the first game to unlock a bonus level in the sequel affair. This one is slightly more interesting though, as apparently this bonus level is only available in the PS2 version. The other 4 THQ games are a bit more unique. These all released within a year of each other and contain a feature that was marketed as Nickelodeon Cross-Save. The way this works is that instead of bonuses being tied to the presence of a specific save file, each game has 3 tiers of unlockable cross-save bonuses. The number of tiers you unlock is determined by the number of other Nickelodeon cross-save files on your memory card, regardless of which games they're from. Honestly, a pretty clever little system. Shame they never did more with it. Alright, I've been putting it off, but now we need to talk about the sports games. Oh god, the sports games. There are so many of these, and it took me so long to research and catalog all the different interactions between each barely distinct entry in these massive annually released franchises. I'll start with Madden, because it accounts for 7 different memory card groups, all on its own. Every PS2 Madden game, from 2002 all the way up until 2010, is able to import players from the NCAA college football title of the same year. Madden 06 also lets you bring over players from NFL Street 2. For some reason, NFL Street 1 and 3 never got this same treatment. Now, I don't know much about sports, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that sports games with a year in the title are meant to have you playing through that year's season. I'm also pretty sure that you can't play for both the NCAA and the NFL during the same season. So, if a player gets transferred from NCAA Football 07 to Madden 07, what's meant to be happening in the lore of these games? Shouldn't you only be able to import players from the previous year's NCAA title? Can someone please tell me what's going on here? I mean, other than this being an obvious ploy to sell more full-priced games? EA also released both NBA Live and NCAA March Madness games on the PS2 from 2002 to 2008, yet for some reason these two series don't cross over with each other the way their football games do. The one exception is NBA Live 2004, which lets you bring over your March Madness 2004 draft class. I have no idea why this is only a thing for this one specific year, but what's even stranger is that these two titles lack the other cross-save feature EA was putting in their sports games at the time, called EA Sports Bio. This is one of the more interesting uses of cross-save in my opinion. The EA Sports Bio is a single save file that can be read and written to by all of the games that support it, and is separate from any of the progress or settings files used by each individual game. The bio keeps track of your playtime across all supported titles, and lets you earn experience points and level ups that carry over between games and unlock various bonuses. This is basically an early prototype of the profile and achievement systems that became standard with the PS3 and Xbox 360. It's really neat, and there is nothing else like it on the PS2. It sucks that this concept was only ever used with a handful of sports games from 2004. Putting all the EA Sports Bio games together results in one of the single largest memory card groups on this list. If you were to play every game in this group, the amount of space required to save all your progress would exceed that of not just one, but 2 8MB memory cards. I've had to add a special condition in the list builder so that it uses a 32MB VMC image for this and one other group that I'll talk about later. Luckily, almost all PS2 games are compatible with 32MB memory cards, including the handful from this group that I've tested. If we ever come across a group of games that needs more than that, it could be a problem, because beyond 32MB is where compatibility really starts to drop off. I also learned a bit of trivia while digging through the manuals for these games. Apparently, Madden 2002 uses generic placeholder uniforms for the Houston Texans, because the actual uniforms for the 2002 season hadn't been finalized before the game released. You probably didn't care about that, but I was burdened with this bit of knowledge, and now you are too. And with that, we are finally done with the sports games. Released by EA. That's right, there were more of these things. During this era, video game licenses for major sports leagues weren't yet exclusive, so companies like Midway, Sega, and even Sony all had their own competing series of sports titles. NFL and NBA 2K3 both let you import players from their NCAA counterparts, but aside from that, these series don't feature any cross-save interactions. Don't worry, we're still not done, because there's one major sport I've been ignoring until now. Un-American football. There are so many football games on the PS2. Literally 3 different annually released franchises that ran concurrently for most of the console's lifespan are dedicated to this one sport. That's not even counting the shorter-lived franchises, the 21 team-specific versions of Club Football 2005, or the football management sims, which are apparently an entire subgenre I had no real knowledge of prior to this. Surprisingly, there aren't that many cross-save interactions between all these games, despite how many of them there are. Some of the football management games can transfer data to and from specific entries in one of the annually released series if they're put out by the same publisher, but that's pretty much it. The one major exception is Konami's Pro Evolution Soccer series, which lets you carry certain data forward from the previous year's entry, beginning with PES 3. In theory, you could take a file created in PES 2 and migrate it all the way to PES 2014 if you were to play each game in order. Throw in a football management sim, and this series accounts for the single largest memory card group on this list, both in terms of total games and the amount of space required to save all the data. This is the one other group that requires a 32 megabyte VMC image. Now that should actually be it for the sports games proper, but I also want to quickly talk about what I'm going to call the sports adjacent games. Franchises like Tony Hawk, WWE, and Cabela's. Going into this project, I fully expected all of these series to have cross-save interactions between some of their entries. After all, these are massive properties that have games spanning the PS2's entire life cycle and contain multiple sub-series. Yet, somehow, I could not find a single cross-save feature in any of them. Same thing with Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Even with their numerous releases, these games just never got any cross-save features for some reason. I think that covers all the noteworthy normal cross-save features, but in my research I also came across some weird edge cases that use the PS2 hardware in ways you wouldn't necessarily expect. This first one isn't too far out there. Suikoden 3 and Tekken 5 both have cross-save features that don't seem all that remarkable until you realize that they rely on a save file from a PlayStation 1 game. This is rare and unorthodox among PS2 games, and to my knowledge these are the only two titles that do it. That's because PS2 games can't directly access PS1 memory cards, and vice versa. In order for these features to work, someone has to not only have a save file from the game in question, but then go to the effort of manually copying it from their PS1 memory card to the PS2 one. The only way someone is going to do that is if they have prior knowledge of the feature in question, and that's not normally a requirement for these cross-save interactions. It also means there's no real way for me to add these features to the Neutrino Launcher VMC system. This next one I found while looking into the Monster Rancher games. This is a series that I expected to have some sort of cross-save interaction between its titles, and it probably would if not for this one feature. Some of you probably already know about this, but the core gimmick of this series is that at certain points you can swap the game disc with any other CD or DVD, and the game will generate a monster based on that disc's data. Unsurprisingly, there are specific discs that are hard-coded to give predetermined monsters, including all the prior Monster Rancher games. This feature is really cool, and unfortunately I don't know of any way to make it work with a backup loader like Neutrino. The next thing I discovered is that the PlayStation 2 had DLC. And no, I'm not talking about the Final Fantasy XI updates, or even the stuff that was available through PS2 BBN in Japan. What I'm talking about are content updates that don't require a hard drive because they're small enough to fit on an 8 megabyte memory card. Every instance of these that I'm aware of is a mid-season roster update for a sports game. Go figure. I did a quick Google search when I first learned of these, and I couldn't find any evidence of anyone ever having archived them. I'm certain that the servers that originally hosted these updates went offline long ago, so hopefully they all still exist on a memory card somewhere. If you happen to have any of these update files in your possession, please put them up online. I think it may be possible to integrate them into the Neutrino Launcher VMC system if I can get a hold of the files. And finally, the last oddity I found in my research is a cross-save feature that is just straight up DRM. Seriously. Guilty Gear XX Ascent Core Plus received a full disc expansion exclusively in Japan. The expansion disc contains both the base game and expansion content. The reason this was sold as an expansion and not a standalone release is that the game just won't start unless it detects a save file from a Japanese copy of the base game on your memory card. On top of that, you also need to swap in your copy of the base game, let it validate, then swap back to the expansion disc the first time you boot it up, and apparently the validation process only works on Japanese PS2s. This is absolutely wild. I have no idea why they did it this way. Just like with Monster Rancher, I don't know of any way to get the disc swap thing to work with Neutrino, but I did create a VMC group for these two discs in case someone finds a workaround. Now, there are some assumptions baked into all these save data groupings that might cause issues somewhere down the line. The big one is that when creating these groups, I assumed that every version of every game is compatible with every version of every game that it's grouped with when it comes to cross-save features, regardless of region or revision. The only time I did not make this assumption is when I was able to explicitly verify that this was not the case. For example, the cross-save features in the Disgaea games are known to be region-locked, so I've created 3 separate groups for the same 2 titles. I don't divide things up by region as a default for a few reasons. For one, it makes things easier to manage. On top of that, information about the mere existence of most cross-save interactions is already spread kinda thin, so good luck finding anything about the cross-region compatibility of this stuff. I didn't want to risk separating games that might be able to interact with each other in the event that cross-save features are compatible between regions. I'm betting that any incompatibilities within these groups generally won't be an issue, based on the assumption that most people will stick to a single region when playing multiple titles in a series. If incompatibilities are discovered, I might break apart some of these groups into smaller ones. That's going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis, though, because if data from one game is saved to a group VMC, and then that game's group assignment gets changed in an update, well, someone might just lose access to their save data, at least until they go fiddle around with VMC images or edit their list file. There's also an assumption baked into the assigned capacity of each shared VMC image. The save data for every game in each group will collectively fit within their assigned capacity. However, that is only guaranteed to be true as long as only one version of each game is being saved to that VMC. If you play multiple versions of the same game, and those versions don't all share the same save file, then it's possible to exceed the group's VMC capacity in some cases. Now it's finally time to get into the actual details of this new update. Before we do, I just want to quickly mention that I recently enabled YouTube memberships for this channel. If you enjoy the videos I make, or the work I've put into the Neutrino Launcher plugin, you can join these lovely people in supporting me. If I can get to at least $25 a month in memberships, I will use that money to purchase a Memcard Pro 2. I think I can get Neutrino Launcher to work with the Memcard Pro's Title ID detection system, but I don't currently have one to test with. The update process this time around is pretty much the same as the last few I've released. Just extract the XEB Plus folder to your USB drive and overwrite the old plugin files. There is an update to the list builder this time as well, and you will need to rebuild all your game lists after updating. If you want to use the new VMC feature, you'll need to select this checkbox before building your list, and the process will take a little bit longer to complete. VMCs require between 8 and 42 megabytes of additional space per game on whichever drive your ISOs are stored on. If you're using UDPBD, the software for that has also been updated, and you'll need to rebuild your game list with the PS2 Net Sync process. You'll need to check this box if you want to use VMCs, and then they'll be created as needed by the server software. In the launcher itself, there is now an option in the context menu to use a VMC if one has been created for that game. Right now, the plugin is only set up to mount a single VMC in memory card slot 1. Saving or loading data from slot 2 will still use a physical PS2 memory card. If a game is assigned to a shared VMC image, there will be an additional option in the context menu to use a unique VMC for that game. When this is enabled, the plugin will mount a separate 8MB VMC image used only by that game, and you won't be able to access any data stored on its group VMC. The other new feature I've added in this update is a recent games list. It keeps track of the last 10 games played and displays them in reverse chronological order. Pressing triangle on the menu now cycles between all games, recent games, and favorites in that order. I've also made a few tweaks that I think improve the overall user experience. The context menu now defaults to editing per-game launch options instead of the global preset, and accurate reads is now enabled by default, as apparently that's better for compatibility. If you use the cheat device integration I added with the last update, the launch menu now has a couple of extra options. The second file path below the one that launches the game quits out to XEB+, and the option below that reboots the entire console. Now, around the time I first released this project, OPL added support for 128 by 128 pixel disk icons. I stuck with the older 64 by 64 icons for my plugin because it doesn't need the extra resolution and larger images hurt performance. However, I keep seeing people using the 128 by 128 icons, which results in this happening. Because of that, I've begrudgingly added support for not just 128 by 128, but literally any resolution disk icons you want. I still recommend not exceeding the 64 by 64 resolution, but people weren't doing that anyway, so have at it. I think that covers everything I have for this update. Not a whole lot to go over in this one because VMC implementation took a massive amount of time. Now that that's done though, the plugin is starting to get to a point where I'd consider it mostly complete. There is still stuff I want to add, and I might tweak things a bit more here and there, but VMCs were the last big feature that I've been hoping to add since the start of this project. If you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to this channel. There will probably be at least a couple more of these update videos in the future. Also, my work on the Neutrino Launcher plugin was recently featured in an XEB Plus 2-year anniversary showcase. I'll put a link to that video down in the description. It's only a couple minutes long, so go give it a watch. Before I go, I need to thank Megabitmap for updating his UDPBD server software to work with the new VMC implementation, and the XEB Plus developers and community for making this all possible. I'll see you guys later.